I'm Kristen Sargent, Chevy Chase at Home's Member and Volunteer Programs Manager. As you may know, Chevy Chase at Home engages adults 55 and older in social and educational programming. We also provide volunteer services to our members who need assistance to remain in their homes, such as rides to the doctor, tech support, and minor household chores. We are so glad to have you join us this afternoon for our speaker series. Susan Post, who is a member of Chevy Chase at Home's Board of Directors and co-chair of our Speakers Committee, is going to introduce our speaker today, David Oldfield, and Susan will moderate today's talk. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Susan.
Well, hi, everybody. So glad you could all join us. David Oldfield is the founder and director of Farther On, a process which invites seniors to experience the adventures of growing older through a creative revisioning of their lives. Using life mapping, we can create a visual picture of our personal history with all its crossroads, accomplishments, and disappointments, and create something of true value for ourselves and our families. As David says, the story of a long life fully lived is the great gift elders offer to their families and future generations and to themselves. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome David to Chevy Chase at Home.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you all for showing up today. It's great to see so many smiling faces. We were worried before you all signed on. It's just such a lovely day. This has been fun for me because it's given me an opportunity to get back in touch with Susan Post, who we worked together 40 years ago and haven't seen each other since. So it's been real fun. And as a matter of fact, the life mapping process that I'm going to be talking about today actually originated when Susan and I both worked at a psychiatric hospital. And I was in the expressive therapy department there. And our job in expressive therapy is sort of like an amalgamation of disciplines like art therapy and movement therapy and drama therapy and giving people alternative ways of getting in touch with how they're feeling and how to give expression to that when words don't really do that very well. And it's neat that this was where life mapping all started for me, is when I was working with really tough, hard to contact people way back when. So this has been a great joy for me. Maybe just a little bit of background about me will help frame this presentation and give you a better sense of why I do what I do and why I think life mapping is a particularly satisfying creative endeavor for old folks like us. I make my living in a pretty unusual way. 45 years ago, my God, 45 years ago, it's in the years just before Susan and I were working together, I founded a little enterprise called the Midway Center for Creative Imagination. That's a bit of a mouthful. This is the Midway Center for Creative Imagination. It was a bit of a lark back then. I absolutely loved working with people's imaginations. I think it's the best part of our psyches. And I figured I might get to do a couple of programs before I'd have to go out and get a real job. But 45 years later, here I am still running my little center. And trust me when I say it's not because of any special talent on my part, but rather because in these times of massive problems and rapid change, the imagination is more necessary than ever to our well-being and probably to our very survival. So I've been fascinated with the imagination ever since my first day at divinity school at Yale back in 1973, when my favorite professor began his first class by saying to us, to believe in God, you need a great imagination. Now, he wasn't suggesting that God isn't real or God is only imaginary, but that the only faculty we possess that's big enough and free enough to behold the creative force in the universe is the imagination. Imagination is what separates us from the rest of the species, and we go to it when we are wondering about life's mysteries or asking the big, important questions of life's purpose and meaning, or contemplating where we fit in the grand scheme of things. It's by far the most misunderstood and underutilized of all of our human resources. And it's available to all of us. It's free. It's available to all of us if we know how to contact it and respect its symbolic language and its quirky ways. It's a source of extraordinary wisdom and pleasure, but few of us have been taught how to approach it or how to create the conditions for it to speak about things that deeply matter. So that's been the core of my life's work. I make tools and I create occasions where people can get back on speaking terms with their imaginations and reap its many benefits. And one of the tools I've created about 40 years ago is called the Map of Your Life. So let me start by asking you all, how have you become the person you are now? I mean, could you tell me the story of that? Could you connect the dots? Or better yet, could you show me an illustration of how your life has rolled out and led you to where you are now? What experiences and relationships have etched your character? How have you taken the circumstances of your life and molded them into the unique person that you call me? And could you map your future? Could you show me where you think you're going and what still lies ahead for you? These are the questions we focus on when we draw maps of our lives. Everybody wonders about such questions from time to time. I mean, you really can't keep them out of your mind. And often they wake us up at 3 a.m. on a bad night and demand answers. But never is the urge to look back on your life and make sense of it all, to find the story thread that runs through your years. Never is the need to tell your story greater than in our elderhood, when the demand to tell your story becomes more insistent and more urgent. Like a flower turning toward the sun, as we come into our older years, we instinctually turn our attention to look back over the past, not only to recall where we've been, but who we've been, and what we did with the gifts we were blessed with and the burdens we were saddled with, what's changed about us through the years and what has endured, what hopes and fears have driven us, what decisions changed the course of our lives, what we're proud of and what we regret, who has touched us and who we've touched in return. The Serbian poet Milorad Pavic says, "The soul has its own skeleton and it's made of memories." Isn't that beautiful? The soul's skeleton is made of memories. Maybe what I'm trying to say here is that as we grow old, the soul in each of us awakens and wants to speak. And a life map is a creative way of allowing the soul to tell its stories woven from its memories. For finally, that's what we are. We are stories. Life only makes sense and becomes shareable when we understand it as a story. And after a lifetime of listening to others tell the story for us, of listening to our parents molding us into the persons they think we're supposed to be, or our teachers measuring how smart we are, or our religions telling us what's good and bad and what to believe in, or our bosses paying us according to what they think we're worth, or our partners and friends liking this part of us but not that part. In old age, we finally come to understand that we are the only true authors of that story, the only people qualified to put the pieces of the story together. We are the ones who must remember, who must decide what matters and what doesn't, who must weave together all of the personal ups and downs and how they've left their marks on us, who must make peace with the damage we have done and forgive ourselves for our shortcomings, who must bring back to mind all of the relationships that have nourished our hearts and relive the precious moments that filled us with joy and gratitude and grace. Our stories are created at the intersection of what happened to us and the meaning we make from it. And that's the story that's worth telling. So 70, 80, 90 years is a lot of living, and distilling all of that into a story is a daunting task. That's why we turn to images and tell our story in the manner of a map. Images can say so much so simply. A dark cave, a river that needs crossing, a merry-go-round that keeps us spinning but not getting anywhere, a crossroads where big decisions must be made, a swamp where every step feels like an ordeal, whole stages of lives can be expressed in simple images others can understand and relate to, because images are the universal language. Whenever we want to communicate with people from another culture or another generation, we turn to images and we tell stories. So today I'd like to introduce you to the idea of life mapping by showing you examples of a few that were done recently by folks our age. And by our age, I mean 65 to 95. Those are the maps you're going to be seeing now. From folks who are just entering their elderhood after decades of parenting and working, to those at the far end of their lives facing the threshold of death. I call this whole stage of life the farther on years. It's not very well mapped for us because what being old means these days is profoundly different than what it used to. So we need to be our own map makers and trust our own experience and tell our own stories. And these maps are an attempt to tell the richer, deeper, more intimate, and frankly, more accurate story of what this time of life is all about. So I'll be showing you the finished products here, illustrations that were drawn after a process that took us several weeks. You don't just, the stuff just doesn't sort of like, your life map doesn't explode in your mind fully formed. It takes a while to sort of sneak up on it, and you have to be asking it the right questions and giving your imagination the right invitation so it can really start understanding your life as a map. I will talk about the process of going about this if you're interested in the question and answer period towards the end. But Kristen, maybe we can start. We're just going to share the screen now and see some of these illustrations of maps that I'm going to be talking about. So maybe that first slide, Kristen. Okay, there we go. This is the cover of a book I wrote a couple of years ago, along with a bunch of my elder friends from around the world. And we called our project An Atlas of Aging, Maps of Growing Old. And each of us contributed a map of what our post-retirement lives felt like. The landscape of aging, as you all know, has expanded significantly in our lifetimes, and the possibilities for greater vitality and broader community engagement for deeper personal meaning are becoming extraordinary. The freedom to live full, vibrant, creative lives well into our 90s has never been greater. But no stage of life is so untalked about, so full of misinformation, and so poorly mapped for us than our elder years. Nobody has much good to say about being old, and few people respect it as a true stage of life filled with its own joys and rewards, as well as its pains and sorrows, which we're all way too familiar with, right? What is old age for? Is being old a necessary part of the life cycle, something we need to live through to fulfill ourselves? Well, I asked questions like these of 20 of my elder friends a couple of years ago, and they sent me back the most wonderful and personal maps of their own journeys. So just let me show you a few of them. I selected these to illustrate both the range of styles of map making and highlight a few of the common themes that seem most important to folks our age, common experiences we're all living through, but rarely have a way or a reason to talk about. Okay, so Kristen, let's go to the next slide. All right, first map. This map of growing old was drawn by my friend Alistair, a New Zealand man who'd recently retired from being the CEO of a large corporation. His imagery is simple and stark. We might call this map the narrowing of paths. It goes from the left to the right, and you can sort of see how the road that he's on narrows and narrows and narrows. It begins with him on a super highway, that car on the left, in a chauffeur-driven car speeding along, which was the way he normally traveled as a big-time CEO. At retirement, the big car, the high speeds, and the freeways are gone. An icy patch symbolizes that he's feeling out of control and spinning his wheels as he leaves the rush pace of his work life behind. The superhighway is replaced by a much narrower country road. Oops, can we go back to that, Kristen? Can we go There. Oh, no, the other way.
Excuse me. Yes, give me just a second. Trying to admit people to
Oh,
the Zoom while I'm doing slides.
okay. Well, we'll have
Give
a
me
chance
just a
to
moment.
take a breath. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
sounding very clinical. I'm sounding very clinical here. I don't mean to sound clinical, but I do think it's sort of important to for you to get a sense of the special imagery that each person uses to tell the story of his or her life. There we go.
Wait, Kristen, I'll admit people, okay? You don't need to
Sounds
worry
great.
about
Thanks,
that.
Susan.
Okay,
Okay.
there we go. Okay, good. So the superhighway goes through an icy patch that it's just sort of his way of symbolizing how out of control he is feeling as he leaves the kind of the comforts and security of being a CEO. And the superhighway is replaced by a much narrower country road, slower speeds, and simpler vehicles. And only now does he begin to notice the trees and flowers surrounding him. You know, take time to stop and smell the roses. Well, that's actually something that he was feeling, is that he'd never really paid it. He was so busy getting from one place to another place that he was never really paying attention to what he was passing through. So, and soon enough, the country road narrows again, giving way to bike trails and even slower speeds. So part of the thing that he's trying to express here is the natural slowing down that we go through when we leave the rush lives of our times of our working lives and have time on our hands. So now he's got from the country road, he's got we're moving on to bike trails and slower speeds. And interesting, the week after he retired, the first thing Alistair did was he bought an e-bike for himself. And that's what he uses for his primary form of transportation right now. And finally, even the bike trail comes to a dead end. His elder map ends on a series of footpaths that he can take in many wandering ways. So this is a map about slowing down, leaving the mainstream highways for more remote byways, and noticing more of what's around him. That's his way forward. That's his first impression about what being old will offer him. And as idyllic as it may look, it's not been easy for him to make these transitions. In my 40 years of life mapping with folks leaving the work world, I've noticed that people who have the hardest time embracing the new opportunities of growing old are those who identified most closely with their work and their position in the last stage of their lives. Their self-esteem and their sense of purpose was fed primarily by the work they did, their title, their salary, their status, their perks. And in particular, I have to say, men in positions of power and authority seem to have the hardest time giving all that up and settling into a time of life that, frankly, doesn't care much about who you were or how important you were or how much money you made. No titles, no support staff, no departments awaiting your decisions, no place where you have to be every morning at 8. It's quite disorienting to enter a world where none of what used to define you matters much anymore. So let's listen to him describe his experience. Alistair writes, "My calendar, once packed with meetings, suddenly becomes empty. The phone stops ringing. The emails drop from 100 a day to 10. My days, which were full from 8 to 6, with weekends full of projects to work on and speeches to write, suddenly become vast open spaces. The sense of rush stops. I feel a real sense of loss. Despite all the preparation for this time of life, I don't quite know what to do. The rhythm of my day, so ordered for 40 years, is gone. Do I get up at the same time? Why? Do I turn on my computer? Why? Do I check emails? Why? Is it permissible to just read a book? Why not? Do I feel guilty watching a Shakespeare play during the daytime? Should I take over some of the jobs around the house and impinge on the territory of my wife? Do I stop for lunch or morning tea? Am I frittering away time unproductively reading the news or watching videos? It's taken well over a year to get a sense of rhythm back into my life. And even now, there is a sense of trial and error about ordering my day. Well, I suspect a lot of us have felt that kind of disorientation. How do we live or order our lives when the outside pressures of demanding jobs disappear, and suddenly we have time and energy on our hands to do with what we will? How do we feel good about ourselves when we're not needed every hour of the day? This is one of the crucial conversations folks just entering their elder years need to have, but too often there's just no forum or support for having that conversation. Okay, Kristen, next slide, please. Okay, this is actually a two-part map. You can see the map on the left is what it looks like, and then the map on the right is the person pulling up one piece of paper to reveal what's underneath. This woman depicts her life as a mountain. The bottom 2/3 are shrouded in fog, ingeniously made by perforating tissue paper so you can see what lies beneath it by lifting it up. The map is a poignant illustration of clinical depression, which Morgan, the map maker, says is the dominant theme of her life. Her depression felt to her like wandering around in a gloom that darkened and dampened every experience. Under the fog, you can see the very few things that mattered to her in her earlier years. The two thumbprints, you see the green thumbprint and sort of the brown thumbprint? The two thumbprints represent herself and her husband, whom she met in high school and has been with ever since. A schoolhouse is the only place represented below the fog. She comes from a family of highly accomplished writers and academics. But let's let her tell her own story from here. She writes, "Thinking about it now, it seems very strange that my family is absent, since they were such a huge influence on my childhood. It may be that the schoolhouse includes them, since their emphasis was so much on intellect and never on emotion. Then there are the 3 ropes representing my escape routes from the fog. Can you see those? They are actually sort of like bits of twine that are hanging down on the mountain underneath that fog. And she's sort of reaching up for one on the left, and there's one in the middle, and one goes down into the schoolhouse, and there's like a vine on the right side. These are ways that she escaped from her depression as she could. One is therapy and medication. One is nature and hiking and cycling. And one is leaving the pressure of school and achievement behind. The 4th rope, slipping off the cliff, acknowledges the many times I felt back. So if you'll go back and look on the left side one, you'll see that one of the ropes is broken loose from the top of the mountain and is falling. One of the difficult challenges of people who've lived with depression all of their lives is there's the constant falling back into the gloom of those days. The meadow at the top is green and bathed in light. It shows my husband and me again. Okay, so now it's easier to see back on the left side. It shows my husband and me again, but now we're merged together. So 2 of those thumbprints have become one. And 3 other fingerprints, one for each son and our grandson, now appear. Actually, she asked each of her sons and her grandson to contribute an actual fingerprint to her map, which is such a wonderful way of honoring the specialness of each person in her family. Each person is on her map as a fingerprint. In the meadow, there are flowers and lots of books, which are activities that bring me pleasure. The stones around the fire pit are friends and siblings, generating warmth and light. The lily pad represents a particular group of female friends. We talk once a month and refer to it as sitting together on a lily pad. Finally, the creature clinging to the edge is me. Do you see that somebody is just hanging on for dear life at the edge of that mesa on the top of the mountain? Still struggling to stay out of the fog and keep my face in the light. In fact, today, the day she wrote this letter to me, was a tough day, but looking at and talking about my life map has lightened my heart. Well, wow, that's pretty poignant, right? What you get from this map is a feeling of how life is a struggle every day for those who are depressed, And the number of people who suffer from depression in their old age is much, much higher than we might think, because it's so often hidden away from public view and hard to talk about in intimate ways. Life maps use images to describe the feeling of depression rather than clinical language that coldly objectify it as a disease. By talking about it in images rather than as a diagnosis, we can explore the suffering in ways that are less shameful or hopeless. Imagery is non-judgmental. It simply says, this is what this part of my life feels like. I've seen hundreds of life maps drawn by depressed people, and their imagery is consistent, and that's all variations on the same theme. All of them illustrate a pull downward, I guess, hence the word depression, right? And the constant effort it takes to rise above. Maps of hot air balloons to lift oneself up from a world of sadness, or pits of quicksand sucking one down to suffocate, or endless dark forests with no trails or markers to find one's way through. Lots and lots of people suffer from depression, and using imagery to describe it allows for an open conversation where we can all appreciate and engage in it without judgment. Okay, Kristen, next slide, please. Okay, this is a very different style of a map, one that uses symbolism of flowers to tell a whole story of one woman's lifelong quest to discover what made her unique, and by extension, what makes each of us unique. Life maps don't always have to depict outward events, things that happen to you through the years. They can also illustrate the inner life of a person, the growth of their character, and the discovery of their inner gifts, what the ancient Greeks used to call your genius. This Rhodora is from the Philippines. She was named by her father after a rhododendron. From childhood on, flowers became a language for her, a way of understanding the many ways of being beautiful. As she grew up, prettiness was a yardstick among the girls at her school, a way of determining status and popularity. As a native Filipina growing up in a country just coming out of their colonial times, beauty was a complicated proposition. Rhodora was dark-skinned. Her biggest rival at school was a girl named Rose, who was fair-skinned. On the schoolyard, she overheard classmates arguing over who was prettier, Rhodora or Rose. Oh, Rose is the prettiest, they would say, because her skin is lighter. Oh, but Rhodora is more alive, more active and intelligent. Hearing this, Rhodora understood that it was her lot in life to be the intelligent one, the alive one, and she grew her beauty in those directions. The image of life as a garden, filled with many ways of being beautiful, became her way of experiencing others. Not if they were beautiful, but how. Her life path has led her to the field of sunflowers at the top of the map. In her elder years, Rhodora now runs a nonprofit center in the Philippines called the Center for Growing and Giving, which is an actual sunflower farm that provides employment for persons with disabilities and a place where they can discover their own beauty through working together to provide the beauty of sunflowers to the world. Wow. Her story always blows me away. This focus on finding beauty in all things and throughout the entire life cycle feels important to me. I'm not sure many people feel themselves to be beautiful in their old age. We've inherited a mindset that oldness is somehow ugly or unbecoming, or that beauty requires tight, smooth skin and a flat tummy. Rhodora would say that we are differently beautiful now, and maybe more beautiful now than ever. Here's a poem called Silver by Jeanette Encinius about the special beauty of being old. It goes like this. How many years of beauty do I have left? She asks me. How many more do you want? Here. Here is 34. Here is 50. When you are 80 years old and your beauty rises in ways your cells cannot even imagine now, and your wild bones grow luminous and ripe, having carried the weight of a passionate life. When your hair is aflame with winter, and you have decades of learning and leaving and loving sewn into the corners of your eyes, and your children come home to find their own history in your face. When you know what it feels like to fail ferociously and have gained the capacity to rise and rise and rise again. When you can make your tea on a quiet and ridiculously lonely afternoon and still have a song in your heart. Queen owl wings beating beneath the cotton of your sweater. Because your beauty began there, beneath the sweater and the skin. Remember? This is when I will take you into my arms and coo, you brave and glorious thing. You've come so far. I see you. Your beauty is breathtaking. Makes my heart flutter just reading that. The beauty of being old is breathtaking. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a little bit of a complicated one. You see the big hot sun in the top right that overwhelms practically everything else on the map that says impending climate change. That's kind of a powerful thing. This map depicts life as a river, a very common image people use to describe the flow or the current moving them from birth to death. This man was a consultant to big companies throughout his working life. That's him as a tugboat in the top left corner of the map. Can you see that? Pulling a huge company depicted as a cargo ship along on his journey. A couple of features on this map are worth noting. First is how it depicts what used to be called retirement, the end of working life and the beginning of a life less regimented, less constrained by rules and expectations, with more opportunities to live as one chooses. As he leaves his workaday existence as a tugboat, the river of his life goes through a series of locks, which he calls the locks of unlearning. Life now requires him to unlearn or let go of things he'd learned in order to make it in the work world, but now are actually obstacles to his fully embracing the new challenges and adventures of growing old. He identifies 3 things he has to unlearn as he leaves his work world behind. The first one he calls the habit of busyness, which has become a bit of a disease in our work lives. Everyone at work has to be busy, or at least look busy all the time, as though busyness has anything to do with being productive. And trust me when I say it doesn't. But giving up busyness as a habit is tough, as my friend Alistair spoke about in his first map. What do I do with my time now that it's my own? The second lock he has to pass through is what he calls the unlearning the need for self-importance. You might have experienced this yourself. As we age and leave the hierarchies of work world behind, old people become more and more anonymous. We aren't looked at so much anymore. We aren't needed so much. We're out of the mainstream flow of commerce and culture for the most part. There's nothing wrong with being anonymous, but it takes some getting used to. And finally, the third lock that's required before he becomes old is unlearning the mindset that he is somehow incomplete and always needs something more to be satisfied. This is the delusion of consumer societies creating artificial cravings for new stuff and more stuff. Growing old invites the opposite movement. Growing old is a lot about unloading, shedding, simplifying, and unlearning. Picasso says every act of creation is first an act of destruction. Before we can create a new life more suited to our elderhood, we must let go of the lifestyle that binds us to the rules of life we're leaving behind. So, the second noteworthy element of this map is the prominence of death, which shows up 3 times going down the river. See those 3 channels that branch off on the left side of the main river as it goes down the page, at various points downstream. The proximity of death distinguishes an old person's experience from all other age groups. This is what makes our time of life special. For most of our lives, death is an abstraction. We know what will happen, but we don't really pay much attention to it because it seems so far off. But death is a palpable presence now. We feel it following us around. We feel it as it takes friends and loved ones from us. And as we glance at the obituary pages in the paper and note how many people our age or younger are dying, so we can no longer ignore it or conveniently pretend it's not coming for us too, and sooner than later. Coming to terms with that fact changes the way we live each day. E.M. Forster says, death destroys a person, but the idea of death saves him or her. Death destroys a person, but the idea of death saves him or her. As we age, we finally begin to realize that death might be the greatest teacher of all, because knowing we are going to die gives each living moment the preciousness it deserves. And what greater learning is there than that? So paradoxically, some of the most uplifting life map conversations I've had are about our deaths and how we feel about them, and how we live day to day with the sure knowledge that it's coming for us. Finally, the sign at the bottom right of the map expresses a pretty powerful realization. The sign reads, "Life goes on, I do not." There is a larger story being told in and through our lives. And I've found that the folks who are most settled and at peace in the later stage of their lives are those who have stopped identifying themselves with their little selves, their egos and their bodies, which are indeed winding down, and started identifying with the life force that runs through all living things. Not my life, but life itself is what matters. Mary Oliver captures this bigger story in a beautiful poem called Wild Geese, which you might have heard. It goes like this. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Life is a migration, and we are all heading home. Okay, Kristen, next slide. Just a couple more. This is drawn by an Englishman. It's just one of my favorites. He was clearly the best artist in our group, but having artistic talent doesn't make for a better life map. It's beautiful to look at, but the life mapping is all about honesty and vulnerability and clarity, just using whatever images with your own unpracticed hand and drawing them however you do. That's what makes for the real power of a life map. But this guy happened to be really a good artist. He's mapped his whole life in the shape of a heart. And he drew this map after years and years of caring for his wife through a long battle with cancer. It came to him then, as it does for so many, that he was a lucky man indeed to have loved so much in his life. In the midst of his grieving and sorrow, what shone through were the happiest memories of times shared with his life partner. So this map is an expression of gratitude, which is where so many of us end up in reflecting back on our long lives. We end up with a feeling of gratitude. He found that his story was best understood against the backdrop of all he had loved and all the ways the world had loved him back. Unavoidably, old age is a time of loss, but how we deal with it, accept it or reject it, run away from it or embrace it, shapes our character and our outlook. And finally, last slide. So this is my great friend Anne's map. She draws her life as a musical score. I don't know if you can see my face, but I can't stop smiling when I look at Anne's map. We had the greatest time making this, and I was just so happy that she found such a great way of expressing herself. Anne was 90 or 91 when she did this and had been singing in choirs since I believe she was 8. So music became a natural language through which to tell her story. See, everybody's got that in their own lives, right? Everybody's got like a metaphorical language to say, boy, this is the way I would tell my story. And hers was music. Each note represents an event, an experience, or a relationship that formed the symphony of her life. So you can see all of those notes are numbered. And Anne came along with a key to this music, where all of those numbers were associated with a particular memory that she loved as part of her life. The high notes are her happy times. The low notes represent times of sadness or fear or disappointment or struggle, but somehow they all go together to make the music. The low notes are no less important than the high notes. The higher the notes, the more wonderful was her life at the time. And the same was true with the lowest notes. So if you look at that top line, I think number 7, you see there's 3 really low notes way off the scale. That was probably a really tough time that Anne was going through. Rests are times in her life that she's forgotten or when nothing very memorable seemed to be happening. Chords represent the most intense times when forces doubled and tripled back on themselves to produce the most powerful experiences and relationships. She was about to add the coda to her life, the final stanzas, but she reckoned she wasn't quite ready to let go of things for things to end just yet. She figured she still had a few more movements in her life before she was going to get to the coda. But here's the most beautiful thing about Anne's map to me. When she presented it to our group, she sang it. She sang her life to us. Isn't that just a great thing? She brought in an auto harp to accompany herself, strumming major chords for the good times and minor chords for the bad times. And we were all stunned to hear this 90-year-old woman sing her life to us in her still, strong voice. So my last thing is this. Anne's creative ingenuity represents a point I really want you to leave with. We don't often associate being old with being creative, but I'm here to tell you that it's true. As our bodies age and sag, as our waists thicken and our skin dries out, the fire of creativity kindles within us, and we need to express it somehow. We need an opportunity and a means for doing so. Life maps provide both, and it's not mere coincidence that the overarching mood of these life mapping sessions is an exhilarating combination of joy and surprise and fulfillment, the kind of fulfillment that comes at the end of a good story well told. So that's sort of like a summary of what life mapping is all about, and hopefully you may have even heard in my voice just why I love doing it so much. I'm just working with the very best parts of people. You know, all of us have a creative urge inside us that is really, I think, crying to get out. And most of us don't believe in it or trust it. And that's the great joy of doing this, is that we get together and all of us end up making a life map. You might be thinking, oh, little old me, I couldn't possibly make a map of my life. And I've been doing this for 40 years. And I'm telling you, everybody makes a life map. Everybody can do it. It's just the most natural thing if you're just given the right opportunity. So let me shut up a little bit, and I'd love to know what you think about that. I'd love to know if there's any questions or comments or clarifications I can make.
From Patricia, suggesting we read Gene Cohen's The Creative Age, Cohen did seminal research in aging and creativity
Great,
and set all of this in motion some 40 years ago.
great.
And Elizabeth, you have your hand raised. You have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned that you've been working with people on the life maps, but what does that mean to work with them? Are you doing workshops? Do you have certain prompts that you give to have people start thinking about things? Are there certain materials that you suggest, or is that up to the person? I mean, can you tell me a little bit about the actual process of it?
Yeah, I'd love to. But maybe before I do, Ann Ingram, are you on? I think I see the top of your head, Ann. Are you here? Yeah, there's Ann. Will you turn your mic on? Can you turn your mic on? So this is Ann. This is Ann of the musical score. So this is Ann's life map was the musical score at the very, very end. And Ann, the question just came to us about, can you talk about the process of what it takes to, what does a life mapping sort of like workshop look like? And I'm happy to talk about it, but I'd love to hear from Ann. Yeah.
Well, we started out introducing each other and starting to reminisce about things. And the interesting thing is, as people talked, it piqued memories that had lay buried for a long time. And David brought along a lot of art materials for us to use, and we started jotting things down as we remembered them. And what was this? How many sessions was it? 5?
Yeah, I think it was 6. I think it was 6. Yeah.
And it was sort of the group was able to inspire each other to remember things, and it was David's able leadership and the group of people. It was kind of magic, actually.
It actually, so to answer the question, I do these are all gratis. This needs to be done as a gift. You can't, this isn't, anyway, so just so you know that. And I offer this through Northwest Neighbors Village. I'm just across Western Avenue for you guys. That's where Ann and I live. And we just assembled, the groups are always small. I like them to be small, no more than 12. You gather, and to Ann's point, there's something about doing the memory work together that stimulates each other's recollections of things. We do, after all, we've lived through quite similar times, right? We're people of a similar age, and so we have a lot of things in common. One of the things that I noticed is women, and this was a particularly powerful time to be an American woman. This was a time when glass ceilings just started to be shattered, when the freedom to be yourself, to make your own life choices, started actually flowering for women. But my goodness, that sort of the day-to-day stress and suffering and challenges for women were quite different than being an Anglo male like me. It was breathtaking to sort of see what people had lived through. So the process itself is at least as fun as making as the final maps. And we start off with remembering things, because a lot of us have just kind of forgotten a lot of our lives. And so it's a simple process. If you ask the right questions, the imagination really responds to good questions, right? And if you ask it the right questions, it starts pouring forth all sorts of stuff about your life that you may have forgotten about. So we start with the raw material of that, and then we kind of winnow all of those memories down to the kind of precious few that really sort of like molded your character and forged you into the person that you are today. And then, as Ann was saying, I brought lots of different kinds of kinds of maps for people to think about as a proper language for their own way of telling their story. So, maybe it's an overland map for you. Maybe you'd use mountains and swamps and stuff to tell your story. But like Ann's was a musical score. I've seen wonderful life maps that are bookcases, and each title of a book on the bookcase talked about a significant moment in somebody's life or movement in life and stuff like that. I've seen wonderful life maps of amusement parks, merry-go-rounds, and daredevil rides and stuff like that. I've seen people do recipes for their lives of complicated menus of, what was the appetizer stage of my life and what was the main course, all that kind of stuff. It's just so fun when all you need to do, I'm telling you, is just ask your imagination the right questions, and it'll start just filling your mind. Well, we could do this or we could do that. And so I've learned not to be not to press on that, not to push that too hard. That's why it takes a few weeks. And then we took 2 or 3 weeks, and I think we took 2 or 3 weeks to simply draw them. So, most people are not comfortable. They feel a little awkward. I think a lot of us were punished for not being good drawers when we were in second grade or something like that, because there's a real stigma that follows us all through our lives to sort of say, well, no, the sky is not green. The sky has to be blue. Well, not in my map, it doesn't. So we have to sort of free that up and let the imagination and your hands start flowing. But as Anne was saying, the chatter that would go on, we just sit around a big table and start talking, sharing our stories, and then drawing our maps. The chatter was just great. And that's why it's so the whole process, I think, is kind of like a worthy use of time.
Hi, I'm Patricia Dubroff, and I am an artist who has worked in the field of arts and healing with aging
Great.
folks for like 40 years. And my mentor was Dr. Jean Cohen, who was the first geriatric psychiatrist in the world.
Bravo,
and then went on
to
to
you.
create the National Institute of Aging. So I always like to bring up his name so he's not forgotten. And what you're working on is just outstanding. I love the process. I love how engaged you are.
Yeah.
It's your life map too.
Yeah.
Helping all these people. And I'm just really charged up about it. I think it's just beautiful. I do a lot of very alternative sip and paints for small groups.
Yeah.
And not your typical, here's an apple, we're all going to draw it, but what are you feeling today? How's it? And I could see, maybe morphing into a little more personal mapping. So I thought that was really beautiful. Thank you so much. Can you put your contact info in the chat?
Sure.
Or can somebody?
Yeah.
Thanks. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Patricia.
Someone, Sheila has asked, would you do a group for Chevy Chase at home?
I would love to. We were actually thinking about having this sort of at the end of my presentation, because this is how I did this for Northwest Neighbors Village, and the presentation led to people saying, "Gosh, that seems like something I'd like to do." And so, but we thought, let's see if there's any interest. I shouldn't be inviting people to something they're not interested in. But if you are interested, again, this is something that if, Susan and I can just sort of work together to find some dates. This feels like life work to me. I mean, you can always sort of tell your life work when the work actually brings you to life rather than sucks the life out of you, And so I would love to do this. This brings me to life. We could just, it would probably be something that would take I would say 5 or 6 weeks of meeting, once a week or something like that. So we can figure out all those details, but I would be happy to.
I would be interested because I'm stuck right now because I'm working on this and I don't like to be stuck. So
Yeah.
I'd be thrilled if you could do this.
Perfect. Yes, absolutely. And even that, the feeling of stuckness is something, I don't know, when I'm stuck, I get very shy and kind of scared and I pull inward. But, half of us are stuck half of the time, you know what I mean?
Thank you.
That's part of this. And so being with other people who are a little bit stuck is just it's just the most comforting thing in the world for me. So
thank you very much. I would like to get unstuck.
Yeah.
I just want to second Alice's motion. I would love to participate, and I retired a year ago and I'm stuck too. So
Yeah.
it would be wonderful. Thank you for that offer. Just wonderful.
be
So
great, wouldn't it?
one of I have one corporate client still left, and that's Toyota of New Zealand. So Alistair, that first map, it was the CEO of Toyota of New Zealand, and I still go there twice a year for 2 or 3 weeks. So I know these people really, really well. And I'm currently doing a mapping group with car dealers who are retiring. So, I don't know what your stereotype of car dealers is, but forgive me if I'm speaking out of school here, but it's not necessarily something you would associate with a lot of introspection and a lot of preparation for time afterwards and stuff like that. But I've got 8 people who have recently retired from owning dealerships who are having a ball doing this because they're all stuck too. They have, they've poured all of their time and energy and money into doing something they're not doing anymore. This is what I hate about the word retirement. The word retired, all it says is what you're no longer doing, retired teacher. Who are you now? Who are you becoming now? So that's part of the fun part of doing this work.
Oh, this
We
would be
like to
great.
say rewirement.
Yeah, rewirement.
Rewirement, yeah.
That's good. That's good.
There are a lot of questions, a lot of interest in your 5 or 6 week program for Chevy Chase at home. Someone's asked if you would do one for the Tacoma Park community, the Chevrolet Village, etc. I think we could all probably be combined.
Yeah, absolutely. We would just have to, all I ask, so I offer this free, which is the way it should be. All I ask is logistical help for Chevy Chase at home to find a place and a time that we can meet. And after that, I do all the art materials and I bring all that kind of stuff. There's nothing better than going into I don't know if anybody shops at Plaza. It's just the best store. It's an art store.
Candy store for artists.
Love it. And there's nothing better than starting a new life map group and then going down and then just filling my briefcase full of stuff. We'll have fun.
All right, guys, I have to run.
Yep.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Real pleasure, you guys. All the best.
Wait. There's also a question.
Thank you.
David.
Yeah.
Is your book available?
I only privately publish. So I only publish, this is a personal thing I do, is that I only publish for the people who participate in that. So I self-publish and then and pass it out. For some reason, I've got this thing in me that this is meant to always be gifts. This kind of work should be a gift. And so that's how I sort of do it. It's not available, but if we do a group, I'll bring it to the group and we can flip through it together because it's quite a book. It's great.
Good. Thank you. Fabulous.
Okay.
Fabulous.
See you all.
Thank you.
Be
Thank
happy
you
to
so
follow
much,
up
David.
with everyone regarding a Zoom by email.
Okay,
Bye.
yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
See ya.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Same here, Susan.
Thank you, bunches. Bye.